Ever heard the saying, everyone makes mistakes? Doesn't it get annoying after like the fourth time someone says it to you? Well, we all make mistakes, and Canadian prime ministers are not immune to this. So now we're gonna go over every single prime minister's biggest mistake because everyone makes mistakes. Let us obviously start with the first Prime Minister of Canada, Sir John A. Macdonald, who I think in most people's minds' biggest mistake would have to be not shutting down residential schools as soon as he became Prime Minister. Residential schools, of course, if you don't know what they are, you're like 7 years old, and I commend you for watching a Canadian history video, but then again, you probably don't know what the word commend means. Go ask your parents. A residential school is, a school where only First Nations people went because they were First Nations, and the government wanted them to become less like themselves and more European, which obviously is a huge oversimplification and not a really good thing at all. And when McDonald became prime minister, he had the opportunity to shut them down. Of course, all the prime ministers had the opportunity to shut them down. McDonald was the first one, and had he shut down residential schools right then and there, his legacy may not be so tarnished like it is right now. Sticking with Indigenous hate, Alexander Mackenzie's biggest mistake was signing the Indigenous Act of 1876, which, just like the residential schools, was trying to get rid of the First Nation culture in favor of the Euro Canadian way of life. So basically, how the Europeans and the white Canadians, essentially, how they were living, is how they wanted the Indigenous people to live. Which, again, not a good thing there, Alexander Mackenzie. You did do a couple of good stuff, but honestly, this Indigenous Act of 1876 really drops down your legacy from a B or a C down to maybe a D tier. The next five prime ministers hardly did anything, so it's really hard to choose one thing that was really, really bad. For Sir John Abbott, though, I went for not doing much to stop the economic recession that was happening during that time frame. As soon as McDonald left office, or I guess died, there was a economic kind of crash, and John Abbott didn't really do much about it. I mean, what really am I supposed to say for a guy that serves like 2 months? John Thompson. I mean, how could you really hate this guy? I mean, if he served for longer, certainly he would have been up there. I mean, I personally like him as a prime minister because he was just good. All right? He was good. So picking a mistake, especially like these prime ministers that serve 3 months, a year, 2 years, it's so hard to choose an accomplishment and a mistake. I didn't do the accomplishments yet, but a mistake. So for Thompson, I'm sorry, but I have to say, not solving the school issues in the Northwest Territories and Manitoba. Of course, after he died, the Northwest Territories disputes were settled, but I mean, that's going to take longer than 2 years to settle. So I'm not completely blaming this guy for it. I just couldn't really pick anything else. Mackenzie Bowell. Yeah, it sucks when your biggest mistake is not resigning earlier. But then again, I mean, what else am I going to say for a guy who serves 2 years? Alright, Mackenzie Bowell, yeah, you probably should have resigned earlier, but still, you suck. Next up, another wacko prime minister that is best up forgotten. But Charles Tupper's biggest mistake is not accepting the results of the 1896 election. I do have a video on it, but up until very recently, I didn't actually read the overview page on the Wikipedia, so I just said the results and stuff. But yeah, apparently Tupper did not accept that he lost the election, which I think. I'm not saying, obviously, that that's bad or that's good, but I'm saying, yeah, he did win the popular vote. It was the first time in Canadian history that the winner of the popular vote did not win the most seats. So there's more of a chance that you could buy for Charles Tupper than, another guy. But still, I don't think that's good enough. So not accepting the results of the 1896 election for Charles Tupper. Wilfrid Laurier. Laurier was one of those guys that it was really hard to choose one for. So I chose going against the Manitoba Act of 1870, basically saying that he put an end to the Manitoba school question, basically saying, yeah, you don't fund Catholic schools, even though in the Manitoba Act of 1870, it specifically said Manitoba had to pay for Catholic schools as well. So going against the Manitoba Act of 1870 for Wilfrid Laurier. Robert Borden. Borden's biggest mistake by far and away is passing the War Measures Act, which gave the government the ability to censor and suppress communications, the right to arrest, detain, and deport people without trials, and the right to control transportation, trade and manufacturing, and the right to seize private property during times of quote unquote war invasions of insurrection. Arthur Meehan. Oh, yes, Mr. Meehan, you think you're very smart trying to avoid me, you know, dunking on one of your policies because you literally did nothing. Oh, well, I am going to dunk you on literally doing nothing, as that's what I'm going for Arthur Meehan's biggest mistake. William Lyon Mackenzie King. The King Byng Affair. Do I need to say more? R.B. Bennett. R.B. Bennett, well, I mean, he did stop the Great Depression in Canada, but his biggest mistake is not doing enough to prevent the spread of economic ruin. Yeah, he got us out of the Depression. So what? The economy still sucked, and Bennett barely did anything about it. In fact, he was so bad that he had to live the rest of his life in exile in England and is actually buried there because, well, I don't know, he thought that we would come and kill him. Did he forget we don't have gun laws? Louis Saint Laurent. You know how earlier I said that it's kind of embarrassment for your biggest mistake to be not resigning earlier? I'm going to go for that for Louis Saint Laurent, not because of the same reasons as Mackenzie Powell, but because Louis Saint Laurent should have resigned earlier because he did go on that trip around, I think, Asia, I think, but and it really, really took a massive hit on him and his mental state. So not resigning earlier would have been better for not only the country but himself, the Liberal Party, and maybe Diefenbaker wouldn't have been elected. I don't know. John G. Diefenbaker calling for nuclear warheads to be placed into Canada. Not only did he call for this, but he actually fulfilled putting nuclear warheads into Canada, officially making Canada a semi nuclear power, I guess you could say. We don't have nukes anymore, but we did under Diefenbaker, so I'll leave that up to you. Lester B. Pearson. Alright, Pearson, I understand why you did this. I'm still not a fan that you did, saying that Charles de Gaulle, the prime minister or president of or whatever of France, was not allowed to come back into the country. I understand why, and I agree why he did this, but it's also so many layers. I'm contradicting myself, I know, but still, I don't think it's a good idea to prohibit an allied leader to join to come into your country, but saying that Charles de Gaulle said that he was a fan of Quebec separatists, someone who says that needs to not be in here, but he's also the leader of an allied country. So I'm kind of split here. I don't know, but that's what I'm going for his worst mistake, since he kind of didn't really have many. Pierre Elliott Trudeau's biggest mistake would probably have to be incorporating 200 patronage appointments. A patronage appointment is hiring someone to the federal government based off partisan loyalty. So basically saying, since Pierre Trudeau was a liberal, I'll always be a liberal because I'll always be a liberal. He wouldn't hire any conservatives, even though they would probably be better than some liberals, and it's a bad thing. And the same thing goes with John Turner. His biggest mistake is not repealing some of these patronage appointments, but incorporating 50 more in 70 odd days. That blows my mind. Joe Clark. For Joe Clark's biggest mistake, it's not trying hard enough for re-election. Joe Clark was a decent enough prime minister and not campaigning hard enough against. Yeah, he was friends with Pierre Elliott Trudeau, but not campaigning hard enough was probably his biggest mistake. Again, 9 months. Okay, I'm supposed to choose something that genuinely hurt us more than that? I can't. Brian Mulroney. Corruption. Corruption, corruption, some more corruption, you're corrupt, corruption. I mean, Mulroney was so corrupt. It's unfathomable. In my opinion, Kim Campbell's biggest mistake would probably have to be limiting the members in the cabinet from 35 to 24. I don't know about you, but to me, I think having more members of the cabinet is probably better than having less. I don't know. Maybe I'm just weird. I don't know. Jean Chrétien was one of the better prime ministers we've had since maybe around, I don't know, 1960 per se. But his worst mistake would be openly defending his proposal of the 1969 White Paper, which basically was a proposal to abolish treaties between Canada and the First Nations and assimilate the First Nations into the Canadian population. Basically, with what I think McDonald did or Mackenzie did, saying that we should get rid of the Indigenous way of life and make them into the Euro Canadian way of life. Paul Martin, those attack ads. Those attack ads were brutal, and it really hurt Paul Martin uh, a lot. It hurt Paul Martin a lot. Paul Martin. Yeah, it sucks to be Paul Martin with those ads, man. Stephen Harper's fan base is about, it's split half and half. But people are going to have to listen to me say that Stephen Harper's biggest mistake would be his total disregard for the Indigenous women. Well, Indigenous people, but especially women. Making comments saying that the Indigenous crime rate, people who are committing crimes against Indigenous people, is not high when it almost certainly is. Yikes, Stephen Harper, that's not something you should be saying. Justin Trudeau is the current Prime Minister, even though he has still made some kind of big mistakes. I'm not even going to lie. But the biggest one is letting people protest in front of important buildings such as hospitals. Undoubtedly, this is not a good thing. How are you going to let people that need, medical attention get stopped by these protesters? And that falls mostly on the protesters' fault, but you're the government. You could do something. Yeah, I don't know. And there you have it. Every Canadian Prime Minister's biggest mistake. If you guys did enjoy this, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, did the subscribe button glow with the little thingy around it? YouTube actually contacted me personally saying, if that happens to you, that means that you should subscribe.